Welcome to this week's episode of Practice What You Teach. Today we have Shayla and Tyler from Flow Yoga out in Locust, North Carolina. Welcome.
Hello. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, so tell us a little bit about who you guys are and what you do.
So I'm Shayla. This is my husband, Tyler. So a few years ago, I got into yoga when I got out of college. When I graduated from college, I had got my teaching degree for elementary education. When I graduated, I kind of got a little panicky because I didn't really know if that's necessarily what I really wanted to do with my life and my path. So my anxiety got really extra high after that. And I was like, I have to find a way to just ground myself, like get present, just so I can calm down. And I started doing a yoga practice, and just slowly each day I did a little bit more and noticed that myself was feeling better. So now I'm a yoga teacher and I absolutely love it. That's kind of like my little background story, a little bit of who I am.
I actually got into the practice because of her. So initially, she was kind of telling me, you need to do yoga practice. It'll help with all the other things that you do. I was an avid runner, so I did a lot of trail running in college and things like that, and weightlifting and things like that. So whenever I got into yoga, I wasn't really expecting much, but once I started my practice, not only the physical side of it helped, but also the mental side of it and the spiritual side of it just helped me ground myself a lot better and helped me through, more difficult situations. So fell in love with that. And then once we bought the yoga studio, I actually went under my training and became certified as well. So
Yeah, very exciting. Very exciting. And I imagine it helps to kind of have that support at home of somebody else who does yoga, kind of a little bit of accountability in there too of, yep.
It was really helpful for me. 'Cause when I first started, I kind of did feel like I was kind of doing it on my own a little bit. And then he would start to come into the practices with me. And then when I was going through my training, he was my little student. So I was like, well, you have to do it now. So, but I'm happy he fell in love with it too.
Yeah. And it helps to bounce ideas off each other too. So we can bounce, flow ideas or themes for certain classes and things like that, and get feedback from each other, knowing that we each know what we're talking about from a different standpoint, but we also have our different styles as well. So she's more, she does more like the vinyasa, but I'm more of like a power yoga, and we kind of both fall in love with the yin yoga as well. So that was kind of my second love into practice. So.
Yeah. So some similar but different kind of avenues in there. So the question of the hour, right? The whole kind of purpose of the show is just to talk about like, what is the thing that you do the most that you maybe teach to your students or you teach in your classes, but like that you actually use maybe in your home practice or just kind of in your everyday life?
I have like a couple little ones of those that I could just kind of like touch on briefly. So one of my favorite things I always say is one of the most important things that you can do each day for movement is to move your spine in the 6 directions that it can go. So, doing a forward fold, a back bend, a bend from one side and then the other, and then like taking a twist from one side to the other. I think that, on busy times when you maybe don't have like a full hour for a practice, just doing something like that in 3 minutes just to move your body and release some of that stagnant energy, I think is so important, because when you clear that stagnant energy out of the body, it also helps clear your mind a little bit, and that's going to help you take on your day a lot better. So that's one thing I really like to do for, just every day, and just to tell people something to do every day. And then also another thing is if I'm having like a hard moment, and I like to tell my students this too, is if I'm having a hard moment and I just really need to ground and get present, I like to just look down at my feet and just breathe and just remind myself to breathe and to ground. And it just helps you bring you back to the present moment, and anything else that's really getting you anxious and getting you going in that moment just kind of seems to fade away, and then you can think with a lot more of a clear mind. So I really like to tell people to do that one. It's very, very important just to be mindful and aware of how you feel.
And to back off that, the pranayama, the breathing, the breath work from the yoga, not only helps you get grounded, like she says, but also can help you move through like other intense, physical activity, like long distance running and things like that, you tend to let your mind control your body. And when you realize that, I always tell my students that the mind is the king of the body, but the breath is the king of the mind. So as long as you can come back to the breath and really focus in on that present moment, one step at a time, it can really push you through not only physical, but like intense moments in your life as well. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. I definitely am hearing like some like physical things and kind of some like mindset stuff with this, right? And I love the like 6 movements like of the spine thing, because I feel like that's something that like, you know, even as I'm sitting here like in my chair that I sit in all day, I'm thinking like I have 3 minutes in between appointments or phone calls or whatever to kind of like get that movement. It's not something where it's, oh man, I got to find an hour to carve out like a whole flow situation, right? These are like things that you could kind of plug in here and there and don't necessarily have to take away from other things that you've got going on.
Exactly. And I think that's what sometimes discourages people sometimes from like really getting into like a yoga practice or what a real yoga practice really is. And it's not just having, you know, a full hour on the mat every single day. You don't have to have that to have your yoga practice. It could be something, you know what, you're really short on time, and it's 5 minutes of moving your spine, just, you know, mindful movement. It's just that ability to, you know, bring your body and your mind all back together, body, breath, and mind all together.
Oh yeah. And I'm thinking about how, you know, sometimes when you're not like active in so if you're not a yoga teacher, you may think like, oh gosh, they all do like 3 hours of yoga every day. Or if you're, you know, I'm talking with dietitians, right? If you're not a dietitian, you might be like, oh gosh, they measure out everything and all the colors and all of the things every day. Like, okay. Right. It looks a little bit different. And sometimes on the outside versus what it actually feels like on the inside, the profession or the practice looks a little bit different. And so as a yoga teacher, well, yoga teachers and studio owners, like what does your personal practice look like outside of just when you're there teaching a class?
So mine really varies almost every day. I really do mind. I want to say it's based on my mood, but in also in a way to where it's still disciplined, to where it's like, yes, you got to get up and move your body for a little bit. You know, don't just let your mind take over everything and, you know, let it rule you for the rest of the day. So that movement is so important. So like I said, even if you get just like 3 to 5 minutes of some of that movement in, some stagnant or dynamic stretching, whatever, just gets your blood pumping, get your blood moving. And another thing is too, sometimes my yoga practice might look more like just like a meditation, just sitting there and grounding and breathing and just trying to get my mind in a still place to where it doesn't feel like I have 1,000 tabs open in there, because oftentimes we can get to that place, mind's, you know, always wandering. We live in a very busy time in the world, and sometimes just stopping for a couple minutes and just letting myself breathe and get present is, I think, one of my biggest things, and that's been a game changer for my anxiety.
And for me, like sometimes just like the first thing I do in the morning is just walk outside and just like walk out, and if there's sun shining, it's great. You can get exposure to some outside energy that's not just inside of yourself or inside of your house. Like just getting that exposure is also part of that yoga practice that often people don't understand is necessarily as a yoga practice. A lot of people, like she said, think of it more of a physical practice, but you know, yoga started out as less of a physical practice and more of a mental practice than anything. So just having those moments to yourself to calm and to center is the most important part.
Yeah, it's really what yoga is all about too, is that stillness and that calming of the mind. It's the whole point of the yoga practice. And I even like to tell people too, going on a walk, that can be part of a yoga practice. And that can get your physical things in too, but that just allows you to get up, get moving, and get your mind clear.
Focusing on the present moment, just concentrating on the breath, even if you're not bending and flowing.
Exactly.
It's all part of the game.
Yep.
Yeah, the mindfulness practice. Yeah. So when you are having one of those really fun, particularly busy weeks that we all have sometimes, where we feel like, those weeks where you forget to eat lunch because the day just all of a sudden the sun is going down and you feel like morning just happened, or your phone and your email doesn't stop going off. Like how do you incorporate yoga into those kinds of days where like there's always 10 more things on the to-do list, and self-care, that piece can be all too easy to get like bumped to the bottom again and again.
Exactly. And that's another reason why, we don't want it to go to that point. You don't want to keep pushing your self-care off. So one of my favorite things I like to tell people is if you feel that you don't have time to do something for yourself in that moment, then that's probably what you need more than anything, is a mindful moment to yourself. Oftentimes we're like, oh, we have this, which I know we do get caught up in it. And then we do get to the end of the day and the day's over and we didn't really give ourselves that self-care. But it's not like not beating ourselves up about that, just being aware of it. And because that awareness is always what brings about that biggest change. So if you just can become aware of it, and then you can try it again the next day. Like just always know that you can get a redo. And that's one thing that I like to say is if you're so busy to where you feel like you don't have that moment, is maybe that's when you need to stop and just for even a minute, just to stop what you're doing and just breathe and just focus on exhales.
And noticing that, coming back to the physical side of things, that you don't need a lot of space to do or a lot of time. Like she said, you can just take 10 minutes out of the day. If you know how to run through like a simple vinyasa or sun salutations, just running through a few of those to get your energy back in line, get your spine and your body moving, the blood flowing back to where your mind's thinking clearly again. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Or another little tip I like to do is an inversion. So getting your feet above your hips and your heart. And that'll help the blood flow come back up, towards the brain and everything like that. Helps you increase your focus. So just doing something like that, if you were to like lay on the floor and just put your legs up the wall for a few moments, that's also very, very helpful and helps clear and focus the mind as well.
Yeah.
A couple little tips there, little random little things that we kind of just do when we feel the need, I guess. So little tips in the toolbox.
Yeah. And that one can be a good one if you're like listening to like an audiobook or a podcast or something, to kind of just put that on and lay with your feet up on the wall for a little bit. So that way you're kind of getting that, like giving something for the mind to focus on. If you're having a hard time just kind of being in the silence.
Exactly.
Doing something that's good for your body too.
Exactly. It helps to have something like that to focus on, either something to listen to, or if you don't, just listening to the sound of your breath, inhaling and exhaling. That's what I like to do. If it's completely silent, I'm like, just see if you can hear your breath. If you could just, but I love to have like a podcast or some mindfulness going on in the background. It's always nice to just be feeding your brain these things when you're in that stillness.
Yeah.
Really able to do it.
Yeah. And so what about, because I'm thinking about how for so many of us, like we can get into a good routine, a good practice of things, a good flow, and then we go on vacation and everything goes out the window, because I know I'm not the only one that happens with, where we just, all of our habits just come to an abrupt end, and then they are so hard to pick back up when we get back. And so what does your practice look like when you're on vacation, or as you're kind of like coming back and trying to like get back into everything? What does that look like for you? Is it as much of like a hard stop as it is for some of the rest of us?
I think it kind of varies on maybe what like depending on maybe what we're doing, like what we're vacationing, like where we're vacationing, how busy we are on the vacation,
maybe who we're with,
and who we're with too. Sometimes,
like if it's just us, we might stop and do a whole hour yoga practice in the morning together. But if we're with a whole big group of family or something like that, and we've got like an itinerary agenda with other people, we tend to just kind of flow with what everybody else wants to do and do those types of things, and
just fitting our mindful moments in between. Like for him, he might get up and go for a run that morning. For me, I'll probably sit up in bed and do a couple of my spine stretches, and I'll sit there and breathe and meditate for a while, because for me, that's what I feel that I probably need when I'm in that vacation mindset. I'm not trying to push the physical part too much when I'm on vacation. I don't want to beat myself up about that. I really just want to keep myself in a good place where I can really just embrace everything that's going on around me. So I'm not just rushing through the vacation and just getting to the next step, or, always worrying about what I'm going to be doing next. But I would say it's a little bit harder to get back into that routine when we get back. That one is the more of the struggle for me. And it does, I feel like for me to get back on my mat full time, it takes a little bit longer of that transition. But I just try to be really mindful about not beating myself up. So if I'm not getting on that mat like an hour, right the next day that we get back, I'm not going to beat myself up about it. Sometimes I'll just get on the mat and be like, I'm going to move until I just feel like stopping. And sometimes that might be 10 minutes. And then sometimes it might flow into like 40, who knows? But it's just kind of where our body wants to take us in that moment. But getting back into the routine is harder at the end. But just being patient with yourself, but then also having that discipline. So
yes,
a little balance there.
Yeah, it feels very validating to know that, like, okay, even the yoga teachers like take a break on vacation and might just kind of do like slow things down a little bit. Like you don't have to do the hour every day to be doing it right.
You have to enjoy life. That's the whole point.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
Make that a little bit better, or a little bit easier to access sometimes when things do especially get a little bit more difficult in a moment.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of flexibility with kind of like doing what works for you, doing what you need, and like giving yourself permission to do that rather than getting stuck in kind of like whatever we feel like it should look like.
Exactly. That's a really good point. It's all about how it feels. It's all about how it feels. Not about what, it's about how it feels.
Yeah. So if people want to learn more about maybe some of these ideas to like kind of find little ways to kind of plug some of this into kind of their day-to-day, or they want to get connected with you guys for some classes, how can people find you?
So I do have a YouTube channel that we had just recently started. It's Yoga with Shayla. I have a 45-minute free flow on there, just a full body, slow flow and stretch. That's a really good one. And more content will be added on there weekly from here on out. And that'll have tutorials, random tips and tricks, how to maintain a yoga practice. Maybe, a really good one will be while on vacation. So that's actually a really good idea for one to put on there. And then also I have a yoga Instagram that I also run as well. I always put some random tips and flows and stuff on there. If people want to find me on there, it's at Shalasana. It's SHAYLASANA_. So.
Yeah. And we'll put links to those in the video description too, so people can find you pretty easily.
Yes.
Yeah. And if people want to get connected for your classes in the studio, how do they find you?
FlowYogaLocust.com.
Yes.
And then you can also download our app on the App Store, Flow Yoga Locust.
And we'll eventually have some online classes on there that will be subscription based. We're working on that type of stuff to come out. So we'll have programs and series, little things that you can put together, and it'll kind of help with that decision fatigue too that I like to talk about. Is sometimes if you're going to do a yoga practice at home, sometimes just finding one to do in that moment can be very overwhelming. When you go search for one, there's just so many that pops up. So just being able to take that decision fatigue away from people and just setting up with a certain series, that they can do daily. That's not, an hour, just something that's what do you call it? That's more, like doable. What do you call it? Accessible. There we go. Accessible.
Yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing some of these tips. I know that 6 ways to stretch your spine thing is one I feel like is probably going to stick with me, and one that I need to be doing more. And Tyler, I like that whole, like, the mind controls the body and the breath controls the mind. Like that's a good thing to kind of keep in mind too, because that mind body connection is no joke. It is a real like back and forth constant communication that's happening.
Brain will tell you no over and over and over again.
That's true. That's true.
Tries to get you not to do the things that you need to do.
Yes. Oh, yes. Our emotions love themselves and want to just kind of do what they're going to do. So, yes.
Our brain love to keep us in a place that it thinks is safe for us all the time. So it likes to trick us sometimes.
Gotta get out of the comfort zone.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys so much. This was really good to talk with you today. And thank you guys for listening and tuning in. Subscribe so that way you're up to date when new videos are coming out, and we'll see you next time.